News reviewing all of the facts that are being revealed in this upcoming book, Clinton Cash. Brett Baer has been digging even deeper into the details and all of the connections that are brought forward in these contentions. He will be anchoring a Fox News special on all of this tomorrow night, but he joins us back again here now. Busy morning across the board. Brett, good to have you here.
Thanks, Martha. Good morning again. Let's stipulate at the beginning that these stories don't fit on bumper stickers. They take some time to explain and unwind, but it does not make them any less explosive. The bottom line here is it comes down to tens of millions of dollars donated to the Clinton Foundation and millions of dollars in speaking fees to former President Bill Clinton from foreign governments and businesses that had business or policy issues that would somehow end up in front of Secretary of State Clinton. This is based on the book Clinton Cash by author Peter Schweitzer. We had an exclusive interview with him. There are many stories around the globe here. This first one deals with Kazakhstan, and it starts with a trip by President Clinton and one of his friends to Kazakhstan. It develops into a uranium deal that explodes, and then tens of millions of dollars to the Clinton Foundation from one company. Also, big speaking fees to former President Clinton from this. It all ends up with a Russia reset that perhaps is more than anyone bargained for.
Consider the stunning case of Kazakhstan and how American uranium ended up in the hands of the Russians.
On September 6, 2005, Bill Clinton shows up in Kazakhstan, where Frank Justra, a Canadian investor, has been trying to get control to buy a couple of uranium mines. And he became really partners in a way with Bill Clinton, working on philanthropic activities.
I came to him with an idea about creating an initiative to alleviate poverty.
Furthermore, Frank Justra has been involved in helping to facilitate speaking engagements for the Clintons.
Frank Justra and Bill Clinton were whisked to the presidential palace of President Nazarbayev in Kazakhstan. And it's a fascinating story because everybody walked away from the table that night with something.
The story caught the attention of Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times reporter Joe Becker.
What President Nazarbayev got was this huge propaganda coup. Bill Clinton basically endorsed the progress that Kazakhstan had made in terms of their own democracy, which was sort of interesting given that President Nazarbayev was elected with 90+% of the vote in an election that was widely criticized as being rigged.
Bill Clinton has a public press conference with President Nazarbayev where he praises his rule and praises his human rights record. But the bottom line is, after they leave, a couple of days later, Frank Justra gets his uranium concessions, which end up being enormously lucrative to him and to a small group of Canadian mining investors.
His company was like a bit player, and really had gone from a worthless shell company overnight, got this huge uranium mining deal. And then soon after that, Bill Clinton got a huge donation, $31 million from Frank Justra to his charitable foundation, followed by a pledge to donate $100 million more.
Our calls to the Kazakhstan embassy were never returned. We talked to Frank Justra, who told us he considers this an old story, and said that he's not interested in politics. Meanwhile, his defenders insist that no undue influence was exerted in Kazakhstan because the deal did not require the Kazakh government's approval.
The problem is there are corporate records that indicate very, very clearly that the Kazakh government did have to sign off and approve. And in fact,
that's what we're looking at here.
That's exactly. This is what we're looking at here, which is the amended Memorandum of Understanding that's dated September 15th, 2005, between the Ministry of Energy of the Republic of Kazakhstan and Kazatomprom, which is the atomic agency in Kazakh government. So there's no way that they can argue the Kazakh government was not a party to these negotiations. They were signatories to this agreement.
And there's a postscript to the Kazakhstan tale.
Kazakh officials wanted to take an equity stake in Westinghouse, which is a U.S. company that works in the civilian nuclear field.
When you have a sensitive industry like Westinghouse is involved in the nuclear industry, that requires review. by the U.S. government.
So the potential investors came to America to see the man who could make things happen.
Frank Giustra arranged for Casa de Prom officials to go to Bill Clinton's house in Chappaqua. When I first contacted both the Clinton Foundation, Mr. Clinton's spokesman, and Mr. Giustra, they denied any such meeting ever took place. And then when we told them, well, we'd already talked to the head of Casa de Prom, who not only told us all about the meeting, but actually has a picture of him and Bill at the home in Chappaqua, you know, and that he proudly displayed on his office wall, they then acknowledged that, yes, the meeting had taken place.
So what happened to Giustra's company that benefited from that deal in Kazakhstan? After a merger, it became a uranium giant called Uranium One. And then the Russians bought it.
Uranium One became very active in acquiring uranium assets actually in the United States itself. By 2008, 2009, they were a particularly attractive target for the Russian government.
And the Russians acquired that target.
They would acquire what would amount to 50% of projected uranium output by 2015.
In other words, Russia now controls what was projected to be up to half of America's uranium. Our calls to Uranium One were not returned.
Now, does Secretary Clinton factor into this?
For that deal to go through, it needs federal government approval, and one of those people that has to approve that deal is Secretary of State Hillary Clinton,
who, as Senator Clinton, was vigorously opposed to these kind of buys from countries into U.S.
That's a great point, Brett. You remember the Dubai ports deal, for example, which he was opposed to.
Believe that no foreign government should control our ports.
In this particular case, we're talking about uranium. We're talking about things that relate to the nuclear industry. We're talking about the Russian government,
which already provides equipment, material to Iran.
That's correct. The problem is that Hillary Clinton's family foundation, the Clinton Foundation, was receiving tens of millions of dollars from shareholders in Uranium One who wanted the Russian government to acquire them because it would be a financial landfall.
So what this amounts to in the end is a Russian company, essentially controlled by Vladimir Putin, will now be in charge of a substantial portion of American uranium. Russia sends uranium to its client state, Iran. So American uranium could well be sent to the very nation we're negotiating with to try to slow its ability to develop a nuclear weapon. Thus, we see how far-reaching the effect of the Clinton blur, as Schweitzer puts it, can be.
A key part to all of this is that these specific donations from the uranium company and its officers to the Clinton Foundation were not disclosed, which flies in the face of the deal the Clintons struck with the Obama administration when Clinton became Secretary of State. Also worth pointing out, just today, according to Reuters, the Clinton Foundation is refiling at least 5 annual tax returns after, quote, errors in how they reported donations from governments and other errors. Now, we've asked the Clinton campaign and Clinton surrogates for response to this and many other stories we'll lay out in this hour. They've not responded, but they put out this statement today after a long New York Times piece about Kazakhstan. Quote, in a statement, Brian Fallon, a spokesman for Mrs. Clinton's presidential campaign, said, no one has ever produced a shred of evidence supporting the theory that Hillary Clinton ever took action as Secretary of State to support the interests of donors to the Clinton Foundation. He emphasized that multiple United States agencies, as well as the Canadian government, had signed off on the deal and that, in general, such matters were handled at a level below the Secretary. Quote, to suggest the State Department under then-Secretary Clinton exerted undue influence in the U.S. government's review of the sale of Uranium One is utterly baseless. Now, that's the release they gave them. We have many, many more stories, not just this Kazakhstan story, of Clinton speeches, multi-million-dollar donations to the Clinton Foundation in this hour. This really, literally, is the tip of the iceberg. And it's, as you can see, you have to follow it. But once you get there, It raises a lot of questions.
Oh, but they're amending it,
a foundation controlled by your husband is the same as money to you. It is clear in federal law. This would, if it wasn't Hillary Clinton,
the allegations were essentially that people were paying to have access to her, to get favors done by her while she was Secretary of State, and her husband was at the Clinton Foundation, her daughter was running the Clinton Foundation, and so on. And so you can't do that. You can't buy favor from a politician and get favorable behavior and response.
I think if you look at the quantity of money and you look at the amount of money, the sources of money, and the timing of beneficial policy actions, it's extremely troubling. We're not talking about one or two.
Better?
I think it's worse in a lot of cases because we're not talking about one or two or three examples. We're talking about dozens of examples and policy decisions that always benefit those who have provided them with funds. I think ultimately what happens is there needs to be investigation by somebody who actually has subpoena power, who can actually try to look at those emails.
What would you subpoena, though? If you had those powers, what would you subpoena?
I would subpoena the server. I would subpoena the emails. I would subpoena phone records to see when they're having conversations, when they're having discussions, and to see if it fits the pattern. I mean, the Clinton position is basically that these are all just massive coincidences. I don't think there's that many coincidences in American politics. I mean, I've seen it on both sides of the aisle. I've gone after both sides of the aisle, and I just don't believe
there's a pattern.
Yes, there's an extensive pattern there.
Okay, so Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson has come out and said, look, I don't want the right to rise up quite yet. He says there's no evidence of quid pro quo here.
Right,
he said it looks like it just might be mistakes. So are you surprised, Peter, that some Republicans haven't taken up this mantle, haven't pressed harder on these accusations?
No, I think I would hope that, first of all, I don't know if that he's read the book. There's a lot of people commenting on it that haven't even read the book, and a lot of claims what they're saying I'm saying. What I'm simply saying is, look, there is a position that Hillary Clinton takes. There is an influx of large amounts of money, tens of millions, and sometimes more than $100 million from an interested party, and then she reverses course. She takes a policy prescription 180 degrees different than the position she previously held.
But the Clinton camp said that, for instance, in the Uranium 1 situation, she wasn't even involved directly in that, though.
Well, I would dispute that. I would dispute that. I don't think that's an accurate representation. You have, in that case, think about this, a small uranium company in Canada that the Russian government wants to purchase. You have 9 major shareholders who are giving $145 million to the Clinton Foundation and sponsoring speeches as all of this is going on. Maybe that's coincidence, but when you see all the other examples in the book, it's really hard to conclude that it's coincidence.
Okay, so